For everyone who is joining, my name is Colleen Baker. I am a producer here at the Houston Chronicle and of HC Live, of course. Thank you all for coming. Obviously, today we are very, very excited to get to the man of the hour, Mr. Chris Hollins, the controller of our wonderful city here in Houston. And he obviously will be taking all of your questions live in a little bit. So I already start seeing people saying hello from the Harris County Treasury. So we've got government officials, we've got residents already tuning in. We like to ask you where in Houston or in Texas or abroad, wherever you are, let us know where you are tuning in from. Me and Abby are here in the Galleria area, reporting live from the Houston Chronicle offices. The controller himself is downtown at City Hall, where we would expect him to be. I see people from Midtown, Sunnyside, everyone's tuning in. So before I obviously turn it over to Abby for the questions, I want to make sure again to reiterate, we are taking questions live. So if you have any questions on budget, on anything that, you know, Mr. Hollins is well versed in, he is happy to take your questions. I see Meyerland tuning in. I am very excited. The Heights, everyone's on. So without further ado, Abby, are you ready? Can I pass it on to you?
Oh yeah, go for it.
Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Controller, for joining us today. It is really, really good to see you. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. And as was mentioned, I'm tuning in live from City Hall, 901 Bagby, soon to be 901 Sylvester Turner Avenue.
Very exciting. You were the spearhead for that little street renaming over on Bagby Street, right?
Yeah, well, there's still work to do, but we're excited at the outpouring of support. And right now it's working its way through City Council, but we're looking forward to seeing that change come soon and having this tremendous honor, not only for the former mayor and his legacy, but it's an honor for us to recognize him and all the work that he did to bring Houston into the 21st century.
Very exciting. If you guys missed it, I wrote a story not too long ago on the renaming of Bagby Street. It is going to become Sylvester Turner Avenue. Controller Hollins was actually the one who pitched the idea to Houston City Council, and Councilmember Abby Kamen was the one who ended up taking it and making it a Proposition A item. So we will be seeing that sometime soon. But anyway, to get into the line of questioning, I'm sure that there are a lot of people on this call who have no idea what you do, maybe some do, but just to rehash it for people who might not know, could you tell us a little bit about what your job is at Houston City Hall and what exactly the city controller does?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you, Abby and Colleen, and to the Houston Chronicle for hosting this afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here with you. Abby, you're asking me some really tough questions, and so hopefully you go a little easy on me today.
No, I'll try my best. We'll see. We'll see. No promises.
But to all of you who are joining online, it's great to see you pouring in. It is a true privilege to serve as your elected city controller. I'm the chief financial officer of the city. Normally, I'm called the taxpayer watchdog, and I take that job very, very seriously. It's my job to ensure that the investment that you make in the city of Houston through your tax dollars pays a dividend back into your life and back into your neighborhood. And we do that through accountability efforts, transparency efforts, and innovation and new ideas, right? First, we crack down on waste, fraud, and abuse through an aggressive series of audits that are ultimately intended to make sure that the dollars, again, that you're spending through your taxes, that they're truly being spent on what the city says they're being spent on, but also that they're being put to good use, right? That they're getting bang for the buck and resulting in positive and well-deserved services for you, all the way from public safety to picking up your trash on time, to having parks for you and your kids to play in, to having safe roads and sidewalks for you to drive down, walk down, or bike down. And so we do that through tracking the dollars and the cents. We also make sure that you have the opportunity to truly understand what's happening with your money. That's what we say when we mean, that's what we mean when we say transparency. We mean taking all this complex information. The city has a budget of over $7 billion with a B. And a lot goes into making this city work. Over 24,000 employees, right? And so we take that complex information about the city's finances and we break it down. We translate that into plain English. So you don't need an advanced accounting degree to understand what's going on with your tax dollars. And not only do we make that information easy to understand, but then we make it accessible. We put it at your fingertips. We put it online. We come out into your community and share it with you directly. so you have the opportunity to engage, you have the opportunity to advocate for yourself and for your neighborhood as we continue to move this city forward. And then finally, we do it with new ideas, whether it's managing the city's treasury, which is upwards of $6 billion. Our debt portfolio is now around $17 billion. Whether it's, again, looking at city operations and thinking about best practices, how world-class cities do these things, we try to bring those ideas through our performance audits to elevate the standard of services that you receive and elevate the delivery that the city operates with. And so, again, we're thrilled to do the job. We're just about 16 months in to my term as your city controller. It has been a jam-packed time frame, and we're certainly looking forward to every single day of continuing to serve you.
Right, right. And it's about to get even more jam-packed. We are encroaching very fast on a budget season. I know Mayor John Whitmire is supposed to present that on May 6th. And, you know, when we start having these conversations, historically, the way it's worked is every single financial hurdle that the city has had to go through within the past year kind of comes to a head. The conversation themes like keep coming up, but I wanted to ask if you could tell us a little bit about what the past year financially has looked like in Houston.
Sure. So like a number of major cities across the country, we face our share of economic and financial challenges related to the city's budget, related to how we bring these services to you and the price tag associated with that. And you know, what you hear a lot from the controller's office is the idea of what we call a structural deficit. What that means at the most simple level is that we're spending down our savings or finding other one-time fixes to plug our spending gaps. But what we're bringing in routinely is not keeping up with the dollars that we're spending. And so we're seeing things move in the wrong direction. And so if you think about this in your personal life, right? If you had a job that you're working 40 hours a week, but when you stack up your rent or your mortgage, when you stack up your car note, when you stack up all these other expenses like food, utilities, and so forth, if your paycheck weren't enough to pay your bills, then you would be operating at a deficit. And how would you survive that? Well, you might spend down your savings account, you might borrow money from friends or family to get by. But on the other side, ultimately, you might say, look, I either got to cut my spending, right? I got to cancel my Netflix bill, get a different phone bill, it's going to be a little bit cheaper, or I got to take on an extra shift or get a whole new job entirely so I can bring more in. And the city has that same exact issue. We're spending more on a consistent basis than we're bringing in. And to right the ship, we either have to find new steady streams of revenue, or we have to eliminate expenses through efficiency, or by discontinuing, services, which is something that I've spoken out, against. But those are the options that we have to balance that budget. And it's something that is coming to a head pretty quickly. And the mayor promised a few weeks ago that we were going to see a balanced budget here in the next few weeks.
Right, right. I know you mentioned a little bit about the deficit. I know we're running up against a pretty large one right now. How much is that?
Yeah, so right now we're tracking that at around $330 million.
That is a very, very large number right there.
It's more than I have in my pocket for sure, Abby.
Right, right. Well, can you tell us a little bit about how exactly we got there? Like what factors of city spending led us to make that deficit that big?
Sure. So again, at the end of the day, it's revenues not keeping up with expenses. Now, for several years, going back, a decade plus, the city at times has operated with this structural deficit. But normally you find one-time fixes to solve these challenges. Houston, as many of you know, has faced several disasters, whether it was Hurricane Harvey, all the way up through the Big Freeze in 2021 and so on. So sometimes disaster money flows in from the state or federal government, and we use that to plug a gap. Sometimes there are one-time transactions, like we sell a property or a piece of land, and we use that money to pump it in to the general fund. But again, if we're talking about consistent expenses, if we're talking about employees' salaries, if we're talking about day in, day out expenses, you can't use a one-time fix to solve that because it's going to come right back up next year. And so that deficit has ballooned to really a record number at this point. Coming out of the pandemic, the American Rescue Plan, which was passed by President Joe Biden, really plug the gap for tons of cities, counties, and states during that critical time when we were facing not only challenges to our own physical safety and health, but to our economic safety and long-term sustainability. And so we had what was called ARPA money that we used to fund critical city expenses, including public safety.
And overtime too, right? You guys just sounded the alarm bell on the record number of overtime payments we've been making across public safety, and it was solid waste, right?
And overtime. And so that money was one-time money. We got it. We spent it over the course of a couple of years, and now it's run out, but those recurring expenses are still there. And they've only gone up in the past year. You know, some of the big things that have come up is the settlement with firefighters that gave them a 10% raise, which could grow to about 34% over the course of 5 years. It also gave them $650 million in back pay to settle the dispute that had lasted for 7 years. Now, whether or not you agree with the terms of that settlement, the truth is that costs money, right? And we have to figure out how to pay for it. And so just taking that $650 million back pay arrangement as an example, we issued $650 million in debt to make that cash payment to the firefighters union. That's a bond that will pay off over the course of 27 years. And the average cost per year to pay off that bond is going to be $40+ million. Again, whether you say the firefighters deserve that settlement, whether you say that might have been too generous, that's up to you. Our job is to count the dollars and say, look, how are we going to pay for this? Where does that money come from? So that was just $40 million thrown on, to the deficit. The raise is the same thing. Now, our firefighters have been operating, getting paid less than firefighters in other major cities for several years, right? And even with that 10% raise, on average, our firefighters are still making less on a per hour basis than firefighters in Fort Worth, San Antonio, Austin, and Dallas, right? So it's like, okay, good. We got to give them a raise, but we got to figure out how to pay for that. And that's what's been missing. And so deficit spending has gone up. In addition to that, there have been several incentives that have been put in place to attract public safety officers to the academy, to make that more of an attractive job for them. But the biggest hit most recently was a Supreme Court ruling that said that the city had been operating in violation of our own charter for several years, and effective immediately needed to put what amounts to about roughly about $100 million annually into our roads and drainage fund.
A massive hit to the budget deficit, for sure.
A huge hit. And look, if you've been driving around on Texas roads or Houston roads, if you've been looking at your front lawn flood every time it rains, then you would say, we need more road projects, we need more drainage projects, right? However, we got to pay for it. And when we don't have a means to pay for it, then that drives up our deficit. And that's how you arrive at, as of today, was in the ballpark of $330 million.
Right. And that's like so many factors that go into this too. Like, of course, I'm sitting here and tracking the whole entire list, but when it's just like adding, soon it's just like way over your head. But I wanted to ask you too, when you're looking at your role specifically in the budget process, what exactly do you do?
That's a great question. And that's, as city controller, the question I get the most is, what exactly do you do?
Right.
For asking that and giving me the opportunity to tell a few more folks. Within the budget, the city controller doesn't propose the budget or pass the budget, right? It's common for the mayor to propose a full budget, for city council to offer amendments, and then for the city council, including the mayor, to ultimately vote to pass that budget. The role of the controller is around accountability, right? Our job is fact-finding and truth-telling. And so the question for us is not, is this a good budget? Does it focus on the services that I think are most important personally? That's not what we do. Our question is, do we have the money to pay for this budget? Yes or no, right? And that means digging into the facts, digging into the assumptions, because the budget is forward-looking, right? So it's estimating how much money is going to be coming in and then how much money is going to be going out. And what we have to ask ourselves is that realistic, right? If the budget that comes in front of me says that sales tax revenue is going to go up 20% next year, and we know that, number one, that's basically never happen. And then number two, we're facing a time of economic turmoil due to these tariffs and all the other chaos that's going on in DC, then we might say that's not a great assumption that we can bank on to pay our bills next year. Because as I mentioned, our number one legal responsibility is to pay our debt, right? We've taken on $17 billion in loans, and those debt holders need to get paid and paid on time without question. And so that's thing number one. And thing number two, of course, is that on payday, our employees get paid. Mm-hmm. And so we need to have the money to do that. And so to certify the budget, I need to be able to look at it and say, based on everything that's in here, what we're planning to spend, what we're planning or thinking about bringing in, that it makes sense, that it balances out, and that we have the money to pay these bills when they come due.
Right.
Sorry,
go for it.
You mentioned the overtime issue just a moment ago.
Yeah.
So, about a month ago, my office unveiled some analysis that said, we're tracking to spend $70 million more than we anticipated on overtime this fiscal year. That is a lot of money, right? And we budgeted $65 million and we went over by 70. That's a big miss. And it's something that we have to pay attention to, either by getting a hold and control over overtime, which is a management issue, or on the other side, simply budgeting appropriately for the overtime that we expect. And what we saw, and look, we know that our police, our firefighters, our solid waste employees, that they're doing hard work to keep us safe and provide these critical services.
Right,
because
absolutely.
if we call 911 and they don't show up, we're going to have a problem. And if we look out on our curb and our trash is still there 4 days after we're supposed to be picked up, we're going to have a problem, right? And so again, we're not saying the overtime was unnecessary, but what we know is that we didn't budget for it appropriately if it was necessary. And we have to dig into why we're seeing record amounts of overtime. So
right. Now
that we play, and just to put a bow on it, we saw that in the police budget in particular, even though we expected overtime to go up this year, we budgeted far less than we did for it last year, right? And so those are sorts of the things that we need to be looking for in this new budget to understand if it makes sense and if it's truly going to add up.
Right. Now that you've mentioned overtime and everything too, I know we got a couple of different issues at play here. One is that has historically, at least in the past couple of years, been paid for by the American Rescue Plan dollars that are finite. Of course, we don't have very many of those. And we're also looking for new ways to bring in new revenue to the city. And I have found it really interesting covering this issue because while you have used like ARPA in the past, you basically created a system that we don't necessarily know is going to be sustainable heading into the next budget cycle. Have you guys gotten any sort of indication from the administration that there is going to be new revenue coming in to cover the way that we've been paying overtime to employees heading into the future?
We haven't had those conversations yet. I mean, what we know is what's available publicly. We haven't had any back channel conversations with the mayor to preview what might be in this budget. I know that this past year, some money came over for Metro to pay for traffic cops, essentially, to the tune of about $25 million. I'm not sure if that's going to show up again in this coming budget, or if that money is going to be rerouted to these roads and drainage projects or whatnot. I don't have the answer for you. So we're going to be waiting with bated breath, just like you are, Abby. Luckily, I get to sit in my office instead of being camped out in the basement of City Hall.
Yeah.
But
my little office down there, y'all. If you're ever in Houston City Hall, you can catch me on one of the green benches down there.
But we'll be waiting to hear what are the key aspects of the budget, whether there's new revenue, and ultimately how this balance is going to come. What we saw this past budget was that revenue went down and costs went up, which again, we want to see the opposite of that if we're thinking about balancing the budget. And there's going to be some tough decisions that may need to be made, and we're going to wait and see what comes out of that.
Right. There's certainly a whole bunch of unanswered questions right now that I'm also looking forward to seeing how exactly it's going to work out. But I guess one of the biggest things that I try to do as a City Hall reporter is explain to residents who might not be as in tune to city government, okay, guys, this is how something like this is going to affect you. So I wanted to ask you, when you're looking at a budget deficit of $330 million, How exactly does the city operating with that kind of deficit affect the residents and especially the services that they might receive?
Sure. So your general fund, I mentioned the entire budget being about $7 billion. The
Mhm.
general fund is about 3 billion. And when we say general fund, that pays for police, it pays for fire. Our debt service comes out of the general fund, a big chunk of that. Parks, libraries, again, your trash getting picked up, public health, a chunk of that comes from your general fund. Now, where does the money come from? The biggest pieces of revenue are property taxes and sales tax. And sales tax is simply when you go shopping in the Galleria, when you meet out friends for a drink or for dinner, or you go to a movie, then the city gets some of that sales tax revenue when you pay it at the store. In good times, right, during a strong economy where things are booming, people spend more money. They're going out there having more fun, and the city collects more sales tax. In tougher times, sales tax goes down, but that's entirely out of our control. We can only try to predict it. Property taxes, the city does have control over setting its property tax rate within certain bounds. We have what's called a revenue cap, where overall revenue that comes into the city through property taxes is capped out essentially at the city's actual growth in terms of population, as well as inflation up to a certain point. Just over the past few years, what we saw was tremendous inflation that really hit Houstonians in their pocketbooks. But the city's tax rate was still capped out because there's I believe, a 3.5% cap on inflation there. So what does that mean? Things get more expensive in terms of providing services, but we're limited in the revenue that we can bring in unless we go to you, the voters, and say, will you approve a higher tax rate? And we haven't done that up until now. So we're capped out on revenue unless we come and ask you for more money and you say yes. And of course, that would mean us explaining to you what we're going to do with the money and convincing you that that's a good use of your hard-earned dollars. But what happens if we don't fund these services? And so police and fire, I probably don't have to explain that too much. You want your neighborhood to be safe. If something goes wrong, you want to pick up the phone and you want skilled, committed public servants to show up as fast as humanly possible to help you, to help your family, to get y'all through that emergency. Again, we don't want trash piling up on our curbs. We want to expect, what I say is, in the best times, you can take all this local government stuff for granted. It's only when it's not happening that you notice it, right? When you're driving down the street and you see the median and the grass is like 4 feet tall, and now people are littering in there, and now, a street light's broken. Now it's starting to feel a little shadier than it did before. Then you're like, something is wrong, right? Something is not happening here. Somebody needs to be doing stuff about this. And you're right. Your local government should be doing something about that. And when it's working, it all seems great, or maybe you don't even notice it. When it's not working, you hit that pothole, your coffee spills, your rim is messed up, and you're just like, what is happening?
Right. No, you certainly don't know how much city government impacts you until it's basically slapping you across the face, right?
Exactly. And so what we have talked about is, look, we have to chart a path to fiscal sustainability. We have to get those costs and that revenue in balance, but we have to do it without sacrificing the level of service that we provide to Houstonians in these critical ways. Because if that happens, then people are saying, why do I live here? Why do I pay these taxes to begin with? Let me move out to a suburb, or let me move to Dallas, San Antonio, Atlanta to have a better life for me and my family, right? If you go to the local park and again, it's run down, you're gonna have an issue with that. If your access to public transit is nil, right? If it takes you 2 hours to get where you're going and you don't feel safe, you're gonna have an issue with that. You're not gonna wanna live here. You're not gonna wanna raise your family here. Entrepreneurs are not gonna wanna start their businesses here. And established companies aren't gonna wanna relocate here, with their headquarters, because this is not a great place to live. Obviously, we want the opposite. We want Houston to be a thriving city. We want this to be a great place to raise your family. We want to have fantastic schools. We want to have amazing places to entertain yourselves and your guests. And we want people to travel here as tourists. And that takes having a real vision for the future. It takes making decisions now that are going to have impact, not just tomorrow, but for years and years and years to come. And that's what local leadership has been doing for a very long time. And that's why, I'm proud to be here as a fourth generation Houstonian, raising my kids as fifth generation Houstonians. I want them to be able to make that choice a generation from now, because Houston is that great of a city, and it takes the decisions that we're making downtown right now to ensure that.
Right, right. And I know, like, when you're looking at this whole entire issue too, I mean, we already have city services that are struggling, right? We have problems over in solid waste. We have problems with water pipes. I'm sure people have been driving around and seeing there's water leaking everywhere. Like, that's a problem that needs to be fixed that we don't necessarily have the money for right now. And I know when you're looking at the administration's conversations that they're having about this and the message that they're putting out publicly, we are supposed to be getting a balanced budget on May 6th. But I know obviously none of us have a crystal ball. Hypothetically, if that budget deficit is not fixed, what could be the ramifications?
Yeah, well, all those services that I just mentioned, they could be harder for the city to provide, and then soon enough, you will sense that. So that general fund budget, roughly 3/4 of it is police, fire, and debt service, right? That other 25%, that little corner on your pie chart, that's everything else. And if we start to say, okay, we're going to let go of 1,000 employees. Now, I'm not saying that the administration has offered that, but let's put it out there as theoretical. Well, those people aren't doing nothing downtown, right? Those are committed public servants who are working hard, who are providing these services to you, whether you can sense it every moment of your life or not. And when they're not there, that's work that's not being done. And in some sense, that's going to be services that don't show up at your doorstep in the way that you expect, in the way that you deserve. And now, look, are there opportunities to be more efficient? Certainly, I would assume that there are. I used to be a consultant in my former life. I worked with a lot of government agencies, and I have never encountered a government agency that was operating at peak efficiency on day one. So can we provide better services with the resources that we have? Yes. Can we provide, the same level of services with slightly fewer resources? I think there's a path to that, but it's not easy. It takes real management. It takes real leadership, and often it takes time. And so I have a degree of fear of, if we make immediate cuts, what's going to happen the following day, the following month with our services. But again, we have no idea yet what's in that budget or what's not in it. And so, we're not going to speculate.
Right, right. And I think we have time for one more question before we get to the questions in the queue. There are a lot of people popping a lot of really, really good ones in here. But I know you wield a pretty significant vein of power this budget cycle. You are the one who signs off on all the checks, and you're the one who's going to be certifying this budget this season, as you do every single year. But I know you have said before that if the city doesn't make drastic cuts, you are afraid that you won't be able to certify the budget. If you can't certify the budget, what exactly happens then?
Sure. And so let me be clear. I'll just repeat this again. When I'm looking at the budget, it's not saying, does Chris Hollins like the budget? Does he love what's in it?
Right.
It's simply, do we have the money to pay for this? Are the assumptions that are in there realistic? So that as we go through the course of next fiscal year, when a bill comes due, when payday comes, we can send that out and it's not bankrupting the city treasury, right? That is my calculus on certification. If we don't certify the budget, then the process cannot move forward. The hope in a case like that is that we're able to have grown-up conversations, work together to figure out what the gaps are in my office's understanding of what's in the budget and what the mayor put forth, so that the assumptions, feel realistic on our side, so that we can put our stamp on it and have the comfort to know that, again, the 24,000 employees will get their paychecks on payday. When vendors and contractors do fantastic work for the city, that they get paid on time for that work, and they can pay their employees and continue to power our local economy. And for the folks, on Wall Street that we borrowed billions of dollars from, when that bill comes due, we have to pay that on time as well. And so that is our number one focus within the budget, is to make sure that that's the case. If we reach a point where we say, look, the facts won't allow us to certify here, I think the next step is get into a room, rolling up our sleeves, along with the mayor's team, to understand, what's missing and how we can get on the same page. At the end of the day, across political lines or whatever, we have to work together to serve Houstonians. And when people pick up that phone and call 911, they don't care who the mayor is at that moment. They don't care who the controller is. They don't care who their city council is. They want, somebody to pick up, take care of them, respond to their emergency. And it's the same thing with these other critical services. And our job is to provide those services in a way that Houstonians deserve and that make this a better place, again, to live, work, raise a family. And that's what I'm committed to.
All right, awesome. Well, Colleen, I'm going to ping it over to you to answer some of these very wonderful viewer questions. Again, thank you everyone for sending those in. These are really great, but over to you, Colleen.
Absolutely. And this goes into what you were just discussing, Mr. Hollins, about politics aside, but we have someone actually really specifically asking about labels on political parties, saying maybe Whitmire is more of an old school Democrat versus a new school Democrat philosophy, and asking actually, which do you think you are? Are you classifying yourself necessarily as an old school or a new school Democrat or something else entirely?
I don't know what the old school, new school thing even means. I'm a Democrat. I'm a proud Democrat. And what that means for me is that I care about working families. I care about people getting a fair shot. I care about access to education, to healthcare, for all Texans. And so that's what being a Democrat means to me. To somebody else, that label might mean something totally different. When we run for office here at the city, there's no D, there's no R, there's nothing next to your name. You're running on your ideas and your track record of leadership. And so, where the mayor fits into that, I spend 0 minutes in my day thinking about that. I'm as Abby and I have been discussing, I care a little bit more about what's coming out in that budget in a couple of weeks, and then we'll go from there.
Absolutely. And on the budget, a lot of people were actually asking on the opposite side, the revenue streams, like aside from tax dollars, what revenue streams or investments are kind of the biggest parts coming into the county to help with everything?
I mean, those are the two biggest chunks, right? I mean, that covers a huge portion of the general fund. If we go to the what's called the enterprise funds, then you have different revenue streams, right? So our airport is self-sustaining. And it does get some federal funding, but when you fly out of Hobby or out of Bush Intercontinental, there's a small fee attached to your ticket. And so your flights, and of course the flights of millions of others, many of whom don't even live in Houston, that funds the airport, right? The water that you drink, you pay a water bill, right? And that's where those funds come from. But within the general fund, the huge portion is those two categories, sales tax and property tax. There's been some conversation about other fees, like say a garbage fee. There are other cities in Texas that have a garbage fee. Houston has not had one. And so your garbage, pickup is paid for out of those other tax streams that I just mentioned. And so there are other fees that could potentially be introduced. Again, I haven't been privy to any of those conversations about what might or might not happen in the future. And so it's not mine to speculate on, but there are some revenue streams that could come in that are not taxes, but ultimately, Houstonians would be paying for those out of their pocket, whether it's a fee or a tax, whether it's a pay for a service or something that all people do. That'll be up to the structure of how it's proposed, but no proposal has been laid in front of me.
Right. Controller, you mentioned the garbage fee too. I know that's something that we've been talking about for years, and there's been a lot of waffling back and forth on it. I know at one point Whitmire did say like it may have been on the table, and now like I think the most recent answer on that, now that we have the mayor's team basically did the study that looked into the efficiency of all the government operations to see where we could cut, where we could save, and that is going to be driving a large portion of the budget cycle heading into this fiscal year. But I know at least the latest update on that is garbage fee is off the table until we eliminate a little bit more waste, is what the what the mayor said. I believe that was at a press conference a couple weeks ago. But anyway, back to you, Colleen.
No, it's a great point. A lot of people are also asking about where police and crime prevention, things like that play within the budget. Can you speak to that a little bit, if at all? Where does it play in the number, in everything?
So within that general fund budget of $3 billion, the police budget is just north of $1 billion. So we're talking about a third of the general fund goes to paying for HPD. And as I mentioned, fire is about $600 million, and then debt service is another, big chunk. 1 in 6 of every one of those general fund dollars goes to simply paying debt service on costs that we've already incurred and had to borrow in order to pay off.
Okay, and in terms of long-term deficit, someone's asking, is there anything we can do rather than necessarily a year-by-year balancing? I'm sure you're looking at long-term solving strategies. Can you name a few of the long-term versus the short-term that you're looking at?
I mean, there's no magic to it, long or short term. These bonds that we issue that come with 25 or 30 years worth of payments, that gets structured into our longer term outlooks. My office takes a 5-year view. The mayor's office has its own version of a 5-year view, and they're never identical, but they tend to be like reasonably on track with one another. But again, there's no magic here. It's over the long term. Are you going to raise revenue? Or are you going to cut spending? Or are you going to do some combination of both to bring that the year-to-year spending into balance? Right now, it is historically out of whack. We're hearing that it's going to be balanced in a couple of weeks, and I am waiting along with you to take a look at that. Like if it's balanced next week, then we don't have any problem in the future, right? We'll just stay on track there. But I imagine that the challenges that we're facing are going to take a little bit longer than that to get figured out. And so it takes. This is why the role of the city controller is so important, to wake up thinking about the city's finances, and the 60 talented people on my team wake up living and breathing this stuff, and keeping tabs on spending, keeping tabs on revenue expectations, and raising the flag when there's an issue. And also over time, again, specifically through our audit division, looking at ways that we can be more efficient, looking at ways that we can crack down on waste and potential fraud, and that being a part of the solution as well. But there's, as you think about your future in the long term, right? You're either saying, I'm going to save up, I'm going to make some more money, or I'm going to figure out ways to cut down on my expenses. And the city is no different.
Mm-hmm. And on education, we have a lot of people asking, what does your office do specifically in terms of investing and looking at numbers in regards to education? Is it educational programming at all that impacts it? What does that look like for you in your office?
Yeah, so the city plays no formal role in our public school system. We have HISD, which is obviously the largest public school system here in Houston, and then we have dozens and dozens of other independent school districts around, as well as a charter school and private school environment. Now, we don't play that role. However, if we think about what's going to make Houston, the city of the future, if we're going to be the home to Fortune 500 headquarters and so on, we need a workforce, right? We need young people to come out of school equipped to either go to college or go find a productive role in society. And those, for a very long time, it was college, college, college. What we're seeing now is that there are multiple paths to success, whether that's going and getting a job, whether it's starting your own company. But ultimately, our young people need to be prepared. And that investment in our future generations has to happen now. And, so I want to be clear, the city, none of your tax dollars that come to the city of Houston get spent on education, like period, right? Unless we have some internship programs, summer programs for youth, that kind of thing. And programs at our parks and community centers as well that I'm sure benefit young people. But as leaders, right, as folks with a platform, we have to be vocal about the need for quality public education, period. And we have to make sure that we're a part of that conversation, especially given the turmoil that is facing HISD right now. It's that much more important for local leaders to be engaged in what's happening with our young people and ensuring that opportunity for them to learn and equip themselves is there. And I'll just speak personally. My parents, neither of them went to college. My dad grew up here in Houston. My mom came in her 20s. The way that my folks got by, my mom became an administrative assistant. My dad signed up as an HPD police officer, right? And he spent 34 years protecting this community. But despite them not seeking secondary education, they knew at the time that was, the path that gave their kids the best shot. And so they pushed my sisters and me to do as best as we could in school. And we went to public school all the way through. I went to middle school at Welsh Middle School here in Southwest Houston and HISD. And then we moved out and I went to Hightower and Fort Bend for high school. And then all of us went on to get a college degree and in fact, advanced degrees. And that's how we were able to not only fend for ourselves, but now help others. Both of my sisters are now educators. One of them is a principal. The other is a music teacher. And, I was the rebel in the family that went off into business, but obviously I'm now thinking of ways that I can contribute as well and privileged to serve as a city controller. And so I know I went in a bunch of different ways there, but education is critically important. We don't have control over education here within the city of Houston, government organization, but we have to be a part of the conversation. And we have to be pushing for opportunity, not just for some kids, but for every kid.
Absolutely. Also, another question came in on current and impending federal funding cuts. Obviously, federal versus local dollars, there's a huge stream of revenue and deficit coming in every direction. Will impending federal funding cuts impact our ability to cover costs of things like infrastructure improvement or public services? What does that look like for the work you do in your office with everything federally, I guess?
That's a great question too. I know there are a lot of city departments that are super heavily dependent on that federal funding, especially when we're looking at the city's housing department. If you're receiving housing assistance, that's very often federal funding. Everything with the health department, when you're going and getting free testing, free vaccines, also often federal funds. I love that question. Thank you to whoever sent that in.
So Abby's all over it, right? What's happening in DC right now is chaotic at best. And we know that our housing department is 99% funded by federal dollars. Our health department is majority funded by federal dollars. And if that goes away, we're going to have a real issue. And so back in the first few days of the Trump administration, when he said freeze everything, that sent us into a bit of a panic down here at City Hall. And what we discovered over the next couple of days, because we were really digging in to understand the exposure, was that we have roughly $2.6 billion in committed grant funds here at the city. Stretches out over 5 to 6 years. So think about $500 million a year, a lot of money. And if that disappeared, we'd have some problems. But we have to think about ways going forward, again, not to solve it tomorrow, but over time to become self-reliant and not depend on whatever craziness is coming out of DC, because it's getting worse and worse, and it's getting harder and harder to predict. Even emergency funding, when a hurricane comes, when a storm comes, normally you're not thinking about whether that emergency funding will come. It was definitely coming, but that's no longer the case. We've heard the president talk about canceling FEMA altogether, right? Or making us rely on just the states for emergency response. And so we don't know how that's going to land, and we need to start planning for all scenarios. One of the audits in our most recently put forth audit plan is around looking at our exposure to grants, where we expect that money to come from in the future, and then how the city can be prepared in a downside scenario. So we're going to look forward to that work.
Excellent. Someone else is also actually asking about pensions. What does that look like in terms of effect on people's pensions for this budget coming up or in the future?
Sure. So, so pensions do not fall directly underneath the city. The city funds those pensions, but then those dollars are managed by boards, some of which are appointed by the mayor, some of which are employees or former employees of those organizations, which are police, fire, and then our Hope municipal union. So going back a decade, when Mayor Turner and Controller Brown stepped into office, we were facing an unfunded liability of over $8 billion. That should have and did worry many employees and retirees to say, is that money that was guaranteed to me through my union contract, is that going to be there when I retire and when I need it the most? Through a lot of hard work, through a lot of collaboration between those two offices and with the unions, and sacrifice made by unions to again make the dollars make sense. The city was able to cut that unfunded liability by over $6 billion. It has started to grow again towards north of $2 billion now, but it's in a much more stable place than it was before. I would assume, again, haven't seen it, I would assume that what's in this budget coming up has sort of full funding and investment in those pensions according to the contracts that the city has and the agreements that we have made. But again, we'll wait and see.
Can you speak to some of the audits that are currently underway? We have someone asking if there are any specifics you can give us in terms of auditing.
Sure. So if you want to learn more, Google City of Houston Controller. There'll be a tab on our page about our audits, and you can look up our audit plan for this fiscal year. But the audit plan that we just rolled out has 37 specific audits in it that cover a range of topics based on perceived and measured risk to our city. 3 of those audits, 2 of the new ones and 1 previously existing audit, are focused on overtime. So Abby and I talked about that a little bit earlier. Overtime is at an all-time high, and the deficit that we underfunded our overtime in the budget is at an all-time high. So we have to go look at why that's the case, understanding the root cause, and also understanding potential solutions and best practices for managing overtime. Many of you, we talked about, water leaks and people getting out of control water bills. So this administration put a plan in place last year that said, look, if it seems like your water bill doesn't make sense, then we're going to put you on sort of a fixed water bill for some time, and then we're going to repair the system, and then sooner or later we'll kind of get things rolling. Well, we're going to go in and audit that. Again, first of all, understanding the root cause of why this is happening, because you can't come up with a real solution until you truly understand the problem. And then we'll evaluate the solutions that have been put in place, how effective they've been, and what sort of financial state it puts the city in. And then, again, recommendations, best practices, and findings about what could be long-term solutions. So again, there are 37 of these, and I won't waste your time going down all of these. But if you want to learn more, Google City of Houston Controller Audit Plan. It should be pretty easy to find, and there's a description of each of those 37 new audits.
Excellent. I guess we'll be wrapping up a little bit soon, but I wanted to get to a few more. What is going on at the city level to encourage more development for housing, commercial, mixed-use buildings, higher density, things that could in theory affect the budget? Are you in your office or people within other offices working to really encourage or maybe change policy for more commercial mixed-use things to develop Houston further?
Yeah, I'm sorry, Colleen. Could you ask that question one more time? I saw the chat popped up, and I see that my friend Carlo put a link to the audit plan over in the chat. So if
Oh,
y'all
excellent.
look at Googling, you can just click that link. But Colleen, could you just ask the question one more time?
Absolutely. So just someone's asking basically, are there any ways that we can change policy to encourage more development for housing or commercial mixed use buildings, higher density things that would affect maybe the budget or bring us closer to a, more optimal place?
No, there absolutely are. Again, outside of fiscal policy and better ways to manage our money, this is not a policy shop, right? Your mayor, your city council are responsible for putting those policies in place. We have a planning department and a planning commission that make those recommendations around zoning and codes and so on and so forth. But just my quick personal take, there are things that we could be doing around minimum lot size, around parking rules, that could make our city's approach to building and expanding a little bit more modern. It would add to density, but that would also make areas, more livable, more walkable, right? It'd be easier for you to go down the street on your bike or walk in to get a cup of coffee or some food versus now, there's no restaurant within like 2 miles of my house, which my wife complains about often. And so there are things that could be explored and that might be considered best practices or modern practices, but those don't come out of my office, and we want to let the mayor and city council do the job that you've elected them to do, to come up with the rules around that.
Well, and you mentioned your wife. I'd be remiss if I didn't go back to family. Obviously, you mentioned you all are, fourth generation Houstonians, fifth generation. We started off talking about your Abby's cat making a cameo appearance one day. Do you have any pets yourself for you and your family?
We're not pet owners, but I am getting lobbied and pressured and bullied down the path of potentially owning a pet soon. I've been holding out strong. I grew up with dogs, but they were yard dogs. They were there to physically keep us safe. They were big and they barked real loud. And so that was my experience growing up. My wife grew up in a household with dogs inside the house that she loved and has so many fond memories with. And so she's been planting those seeds with the kids, and they've been coming out. When we're driving to school, they're just reading a book about different breeds of cats and like, oh, Dad, which one would you like out of these, right? And I try not to take the bait, but it's a losing battle, and so I'm essentially planning my my defeat in this battle, and just sort of mapping out how I can gracefully bend the knee at some point, but I'm holding out strong.
I will join the lobbying for a cat. Anyone who knows me knows that I will always join the party if there is someone who is considering a cat. I personally think it's a great decision. Totally on your side with that one, but yeah, time will tell. Best of luck to the kids and the family for getting you to agree to that.
Yeah, we have someone making an argument for why Yorkies are the best pets. So you already have a couple breed recommendations. If anyone else has, I'm a black-mouthed cur owner, so I have to say shout out to my dog as well. But I guess to sort of also wrap up on a personal note, Mayor Turner, we talked about earlier, as well, and Sheila Jackson Lee, obviously just having passed away. We were reporting that we are, I think the terminal at the airport is going to be named after her. I kind of just wanted to get your thoughts on that, because you're part of a younger generation of leaders that are coming up, and the kind of the legacies that are left by these incredibly impressive Houstonian leaders. Can you speak to your relationship, what it was like with Mayor Turner and with Sheila Jackson Lee, what impact, if any, they had on you?
Absolutely. I mean, we've lost some giants in our community in the past year. Not only the two of those, Judge Zanetta Burney had a long, meaningful legacy in serving Houston. Pastor William A. Lawson, one of the three amigos, whose legend goes back to the civil rights movement. and who built the church that my grandmother attended and that I and my kids now attend today. And you know, they all and many others who we've lost touched my life. You mentioned the congresswoman and the congressman, former Mayor Turner. Both of them committed their lives up until the final hours to serve in Houston, making this a better city, being a voice for the voiceless, ensuring that that Houston was always moving forward, not backward, and taking courageous stands in moments where many shied away. You know, during our fight for democracy in 2020, when I served as county clerk, Sheila Jackson Lee was always right there, standing shoulder to shoulder with me, fighting for federal resources, for preservation of democracy here in Harris County, but always working for the constituents of the 18th district, and you know, was tireless. Mayor Turner, I can say the same thing. I mean, he was probably more active than anybody, and personally mentoring me, always lending an ear, always being available if I were to text or call for something large or small. And I tried to emulate him. You know, half of Houston has my personal cell phone number, because I remember when Mayor Turner, who didn't know me from Adam, gave me his cell phone number and told me to reach out if I had, you know, an issue. And so, you know, being able to soak up their wisdom, but certainly their example, is something that meant a whole lot to me, and that I've been vocal about, both while they were with us and since they have passed. We're going to miss them. You know, having their names on a downtown avenue, on an international terminal in our global airport, these are things that are going to remind us every time we see them of what they achieved and what they did for us, the sacrifices that they made. And so, you know, very, very grateful, very, very, you know, humbled even to be associated with the changes of the names. Obviously, this is something that's for the city. It's nothing to do with me. But when I see it,
It's powerful.
Mhm.
Definitely. And on that note, obviously, we are just about at time, but I wanted to say thank you. Obviously, you are part of the new wave of leaders. We had Christian Menifee on. We continue, you know, we will be having, you know, many more of our city leaders. A lot of people asking about, you know, more of these types of conversations. So thank you again to the controller, Mr. Chris Hollins, for taking the time. All of you who are asking about this particular segment, we will be uploading it to our Houston Chronicle YouTube channel. So in case you want to go back and listen again to some of our questions, if you want to share it with anyone, it will be posted within the next day or two. And we've got lots of upcoming events on HC Live. We do these about one a week. So if you haven't tuned in, we've got, you know, an event on how to protest your property taxes. We've got how to buy a home in Houston, you know, all of these types of topics that we cover. And of course, City Hall, Abby is our, you know, guru of all things City Hall, and covering it daily here for us at the Chronicle. So stay tuned, make sure to look on our YouTube channel, follow our HC Live newsletter if you have not already. Obviously, you can see the controller's work on his website, look at the resources that we were speaking about earlier. And thank you again. I appreciate everyone, as on behalf of Abby and Mr. Hollins, we appreciate you taking the time, and have a great rest of the week and stay safe. Take care, everybody.
see y'all.
Okay, thank you.